Get in the car now! Brandon Russo's voice cut through the night air like a blade as he grabbed the young woman's arm, his steel blue eyes scanning the shadows behind her. Those 3 men following you. They're not just random guys. Ingrid Matthews jerked back, her green eyes wide with confusion and fear. What are you talking about? I don't know you, and I'm not— Trust me or end up dead, Brandon interrupted, his hand moving protectively to her back as he guided her toward his black Mercedes. Your choice, sweetheart, but make it fast. Before she could protest, footsteps echoed from the alley behind them. 3 figures emerged, moving with predatory precision through the dim Chicago street. Brandon's jaw tightened as recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. Shit, he muttered, pulling Ingrid closer. Change of plans. We're going shopping. He steered her toward the 24-hour convenience store on the corner, his mind racing. The Castellanos. Of all the families in Chicago, it had to be Vincent Castellano's boys. This wasn't random. This was a setup, and this beautiful stranger had just become the center of a war she knew nothing about. Hey everyone, before we continue this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more amazing romance and danger tales. Also, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers around the world. And don't forget to hit that like button. Your support means everything and helps me create more content like this for you. Inside the store, Brandon positioned himself between Ingrid and the windows, his body a shield as he pretended to browse the snack aisle. His phone buzzed with messages from his security team, but he ignored them. Through the glass, he watched the 3 men split up, circling the building like wolves. Who are you? Ingrid whispered, her voice trembling despite the defiant tilt of her chin. And why should I believe anything you're saying? Brandon studied her face, the way her dark hair caught the fluorescent light, the stubborn set of her full lips, the intelligence in her eyes despite her fear. She was maybe 22, wearing scrubs that suggested she was a nurse or medical student. Definitely not someone who belonged in his world. Because in about 30 seconds, those men are going to walk through that door, he said quietly, pulling out his wallet and moving toward the counter. And if you're smart, you'll play along with whatever I say. The bell above the door chimed. 3 men entered, their expensive suits incongruous with the late hour and seedy location. The oldest, maybe 25, had the same dark hair and cruel eyes as Vincent Castellano, his sons. Evening, the eldest said, his gaze sweeping over Brandon and Ingrid. We're looking for someone, young woman, about her height, dark hair. Seen anyone like that? Brandon wrapped his arm around Ingrid's waist, pulling her flush against his side. She stiffened, but didn't pull away. Smart girl. Just me and my girlfriend here, Brandon said casually, handing the cashier a 20 for the energy drinks he'd grabbed. Why? She owe you money or something? The Castellano boy's eyes narrowed. No. Family business. Well, good luck with that, Brandon replied, steering Ingrid toward the door. Come on, babe. We're going to be late for the movie. They made it 3 steps before the youngest Castellano moved to block their path. Actually, I think we should talk more. You look familiar. Brandon's hand moved imperceptibly toward his jacket. In his world, conversations like this ended only one way, but not with an innocent woman in the crossfire. Do I? Brandon smiled, the expression cold as winter. I get that a lot. The tension in the convenience store stretched like a wire about to snap. Ingrid could feel the dangerous energy radiating from the man beside her, Brandon, though she still didn't know his last name. His arm around her waist felt like steel, protective but ready for violence. Marcus Castellano, the eldest of the 3 men said, extending his hand with false courtesy. And you are? Ingrid felt Brandon's muscles tense. The name clearly meant something to him, something bad. She watched as his expression shifted from casual to deadly in the space of a heartbeat. Nobody important, Brandon replied, ignoring the outstretched hand. Just a guy trying to enjoy a quiet evening with his girl. Marcus's smile was razor-sharp. Funny thing about quiet evenings, they have a way of turning loud when you're not careful. The youngest Castellano, barely out of his teens, stepped closer to Ingrid. Pretty girl. What's your name, sweetheart? Before Ingrid could speak, Brandon moved. It was lightning fast, fluid, terrifying. One moment the young man was reaching toward her. The next he was against the wall with Brandon's forearm pressed against his throat. Touch her, and I'll break every bone in your hand, Brandon said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Clear? The store's security cameras captured everything. And Ingrid realized this wasn't just a random encounter. These men knew each other, had history, bad history. "Let him go, Russo," Marcus commanded, his hand moving inside his jacket. Russo. The name hit Ingrid like a physical blow. Even she'd heard whispers about the Russo family, Chicago's most powerful crime organization. The man protecting her wasn't just dangerous, he was legendary. Brandon released the young man and stepped back, but his eyes never left Marcus. "Tell your father that hunting innocent women isn't good for business. Some of us still have standards." "Standards?" Marcus laughed harshly. "Since when do you care about standards? You killed 3 of our men last month. They were selling drugs near an elementary school," Brandon replied flatly. "I told Vincent that was off limits. He chose not to listen." The pieces clicked together in Ingrid's mind. These men hadn't been following her randomly. They'd been using her as bait to draw out Brandon Russo. But why her? What made her important enough to risk a confrontation between crime families? "This isn't over," Marcus said, signaling his brothers toward the door. "Vincent wants to see you soon." "Vincent knows where to find me," Brandon replied. "Same as always." After the 3 men left, the store fell silent, except for the hum of refrigerators and the nervous breathing of the cashier who'd witnessed everything. Brandon turned to Ingrid, his expression softening slightly. "You okay?" he asked, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture so gentle it made her heart skip. "Am I okay?" Ingrid repeated incredulously. "Those men were using me as bait to get to you, weren't they?" Brandon's silence was answer enough. "Why me?" she demanded, stepping away from him. "I don't know you. I've never even seen you before tonight. How could they possibly—" "Because you work at St. Mary's Hospital," Brandon said quietly. "Because you treated Vincent Castellano's grandson last week when he was brought in after a car accident. Because Vincent thinks you overheard something you shouldn't have." Ingrid's blood turned cold. She remembered the little boy, maybe 8 years old, brought in by men in expensive suits who'd been strangely nervous for relatives dealing with a simple broken arm. The child had been unconscious, but one of the men had made several phone calls, speaking in hushed Italian about problems and loose ends. "I didn't hear anything," she whispered. "I was focused on treating the child." "I know that," Brandon said, "but Vincent doesn't. And in my world, paranoia keeps people alive." "Your world," Ingrid repeated. "The Mafia." Among other things, Brandon's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it and cursed under his breath. "We need to go now." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Ingrid said, backing toward the store's rear exit. "This is insane. I'm calling the police." Brandon moved to block her path, his expression deadly serious. "The police can't protect you from what's coming, but I can." "Why would you? You don't know me." For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in his steel blue eyes. "Because I've seen what Vincent does to people he considers threats, and because no innocent person should die for being in the wrong place at the wrong time." Outside, car engines revved ominously. Brandon's phone rang again, and this time he answered it. "Talk to me," he said curtly. His expression darkened as he listened. "How many? When?" A pause. "Understood. Keep the perimeter tight." He hung up and looked at Ingrid with an expression that made her stomach drop. "What?" she whispered. "Vincent just declared war," Brandon said grimly. "And you, sweetheart, are the reason why." The safe house was nothing like what Ingrid had expected. Instead of some grimy hideout, Brandon had brought her to an elegant penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city lights, while the interior was decorated in expensive neutrals that spoke of wealth and refined taste. "This is your idea of laying low?" Ingrid asked, setting down the overnight bag Brandon's people had somehow retrieved from her apartment. "Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight," Brandon replied, pouring himself 3 fingers of whiskey from a crystal decanter. He offered her a glass, which she declined with a shake of her head. It had been 6 hours since the convenience store confrontation, and Ingrid's mind was still reeling. Brandon's security team, 6 stone-faced men who'd materialized from nowhere, had swept her apartment, declared it compromised, and packed her essentials with military efficiency. They'd found listening devices in her bedroom and kitchen. "How long?" she asked, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than her yearly salary. "How long what? How long have they been watching me?" Brandon's jaw tightened. 2 weeks. Since the night you treated little Anthony Castellano." Ingrid closed her eyes, remembering. The child had been brought in unconscious, and she'd overheard fragments of conversation while working on him. Something about a shipment, a betrayal, names she hadn't recognized or cared about at the time. She'd been focused on the boy's injuries, not the whispered words of dangerous men. "I really didn't hear anything important," she said for the third time. "It doesn't matter what you heard," Brandon replied, settling into the chair across from her. "It matters what Vincent thinks you heard, and Vincent has a very active imagination when it comes to threats." The weight of the situation pressed down on her. "So what happens now? Do I disappear? Change my identity? Spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder?" "No," Brandon said firmly. "That's not how this ends." "Then how does it end?" Brandon's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. With Vincent Castellano understanding that some people are off limits. Despite everything, Ingrid felt a shiver of attraction at the dangerous confidence in his voice. Brandon Russo was exactly the kind of man her rational mind knew she should fear. Powerful, ruthless, operating outside the law. But he'd also risked his life to protect a stranger, and there was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel safer than she had in years. "Tell me about yourself," she said suddenly. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. If I'm trusting you with my life, I deserve to know who you really are." Brandon was quiet for a long moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "I'm 30 years old. I inherited the Russo organization when I was 25, after my father was killed by a rival family. I run legitimate businesses, real estate, restaurants, construction, alongside the less legitimate ones. I don't traffic in drugs, human trafficking, or anything that hurts innocent people. I have a code." "What kind of code?" "No women, no children, no civilians caught in crossfire." His eyes met hers. "That's why this situation with Vincent pisses me off. You're exactly the kind of person who should be protected, not hunted." Ingrid felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "And you? Do you have family?" Pain flickered across his features. "Had a younger sister. She was killed 3 years ago by the same family that murdered my father. Since then, it's just been me and the business." "I'm sorry," Ingrid said softly. "Don't be sorry, be smart." Brandon leaned forward, his expression intense. "Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with Vincent. I'm going to make it clear that you're under my protection and that any further moves against you will be considered acts of war." "What if he doesn't agree?" "Then things get complicated." Ingrid stood and moved to the windows, gazing out at the glittering city below. Somewhere out there, powerful men were making decisions about her fate, treating her life like a chess piece in their dangerous game. "I have a question," she said, without turning around. "Shoot. When you saw those men following me tonight, you could have just called the police. Kept driving, stayed out of it. Why didn't you?" Brandon joined her at the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass beside hers. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe because I remembered what it felt like to be powerless. Maybe because someone needs to draw lines in the sand. Or maybe," Ingrid said, turning to face him, "because you're not as heartless as you pretend to be." Their eyes met, and the air between them crackled with electricity. Brandon reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers traced the line of her jaw. "You should be afraid of me," he said quietly. "I know," Ingrid whispered, "but I'm not." Brandon's phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered it with a sharp, "What?" Ingrid watched his expression change from soft to granite hard in seconds. "When?" he demanded. "How many witnesses?" Another pause. "No, absolutely not. I'll handle this myself." He hung up and turned to Ingrid, his face grim. "What's wrong?" she asked, though she already feared the answer. "Vincent just burned down your apartment building," Brandon said quietly, "with a dozen families inside." The news footage was devastating. 12 families displaced, 3 people hospitalized for smoke inhalation, and Ingrid's entire life reduced to ashes on the evening news. She sat frozen on Brandon's couch, watching firefighters battle the blaze that had once been her home. "Mrs. Patterson lived in 4B for 30 years, she whispered, recognizing her elderly neighbor being loaded into an ambulance. "She has nowhere else to go." Brandon stood behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "She'll be taken care of, all of them will." "How can you promise that?" "Because I'm going to make sure of it." His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Vincent crossed a line tonight. There are rules about civilians, about collateral damage. He just broke them all." Ingrid turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This is my fault. Those people are hurt because of me." "No," Brandon said firmly, crouching down to meet her eyes. "This is Vincent's fault. His choices, his consequences. Don't you dare blame yourself for the actions of a madman." His thumbs brushed away her tears with surprising gentleness for hands that she was beginning to understand had probably taken lives. The contrast should have terrified her, this tender care from a man capable of such violence, but instead it made her feel protected in a way she'd never experienced. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now Vincent finds out what happens when he threatens what's mine." The possessive note in his voice sent warmth through her chest despite everything. "I'm not yours, aren't you?" Brandon's eyes searched her face. "Someone burned down your home tonight, Ingrid. Tried to flush you out like prey. You could have called anyone. Police, FBI, witness protection. But you're here, with me. Why?" She didn't have an answer, or rather, she had one that scared her too much to voice. In the span of 12 hours, this dangerous stranger had become the only person she trusted, the only place that felt safe. "I should call my supervisor at the hospital," she said instead. "Let them know what happened. Already handled. You're on extended leave, full pay, medical emergency." "How did you—" "I have resources." Brandon's phone buzzed, and his expression darkened as he read the message. "Excuse me, I need to take this." He stepped into the next room, but Ingrid could hear fragments of the conversation. Sharp Italian phrases mixed with English, words like retaliation and message and permanent solution. When he returned, his demeanor had shifted completely. This was Brandon Russo, the crime boss, not the surprisingly gentle man who'd been comforting her moments before. "I have to go," he said, checking his watch. "My security team will stay with you. Don't leave this apartment for any reason." "Where are you going?" "To end this." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Ingrid, I need you to understand something. What happens tonight might change how you see me, the things I'm about to do." "Will you be safe?" she interrupted. The question seemed to surprise him. "That's what you're worried about? My safety?" "Yes." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. "Is that crazy?" For a moment, Brandon's mask slipped entirely. The vulnerable expression that flickered across his face made him look younger, almost boyish, despite the expensive suit and dangerous reputation. "A little crazy," he admitted, "but I like it." He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms. The kiss was desperate, hungry, full of things neither of them was ready to say. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Brandon pressed his forehead against hers. "I'll come back," he promised. "Whatever happens tonight, I'll come back to you." "Promise?" "On my sister's memory." After he left, Ingrid found herself pacing the penthouse like a caged animal. The security team, led by a soft-spoken man named Antonio, who treated her with old-world courtesy, kept watch from the shadows. They were professional, nearly invisible, but their presence was a constant reminder of the danger swirling around her. Hours passed. Ingrid tried to read, tried to watch television, tried to sleep. Nothing worked. Every siren in the distance made her heart race. Every news bulletin had her reaching for the remote, terrified she'd see Brandon's face on the screen. At 3 in the morning, her phone rang. Unknown number. Unknown. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Ingrid Matthews." The voice was cultured, older, with a slight Italian accent. "My name is Vincent Castellano. I believe you know why I'm calling." Ice flooded her veins. "How did you get this number?" "I have resources, just like Mr. Russo. I'm calling to make you an offer. I'm not interested in anything you have to say, not even if it means saving his life." Ingrid's blood turned to acid. "What do you mean?" "Brandon Russo is currently surrounded by my men in a warehouse on the south side. He came alone. Very noble, very stupid. He has perhaps 20 minutes before my patience runs out." "You're lying." "Am I? Check the news. I'm sure someone will report the explosion." Across the room, Antonio was suddenly alert, pressing a finger to his earpiece and speaking in rapid Italian. His expression confirmed her worst fears. "What do you want?" Ingrid whispered. "Simple trade," Vincent said smoothly. "You for him. Come alone to the address I'm about to text you, and Brandon Russo lives to see another day." "Don't listen to him," Antonio called out. But Ingrid was already moving. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" "You don't. But you know what happens if you don't try." The warehouse district at 4 in the morning was a wasteland of shadows and broken dreams. Ingrid's hands shook as she drove Brandon's spare car, a sleek BMW that Antonio had tried desperately to stop her from taking, toward what was almost certainly her death. "This is insane," she whispered to herself, but kept driving. Vincent's text had been simple. "Pier 47, Warehouse C. Come alone or watch him die on the evening news." She'd left Antonio and his team unconscious, a bottle of wine laced with sleeping pills she'd stolen from Brandon's medicine cabinet. Her nursing training had come in handy for once, though she'd never imagined using her knowledge of sedatives to drug Mafia soldiers. Her phone buzzed with frantic calls from unknown numbers. Brandon's people, probably, trying to stop her from making the biggest mistake of her life. She ignored them all. The warehouse loomed before her like a monument to poor decisions. 3 black SUVs were parked outside, their windows tinted, engines running. This was Vincent Castellano's idea of a simple trade. Ingrid parked 50 yards away and sat for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart. In the distance, she could see lights inside the warehouse, moving shadows that could be men with guns. This was madness, but it was also the only choice she could live with. Her phone rang. Vincent again. "Excellent," he said when she answered. "Right on time. Walk to the main entrance. Keep your hands visible. Is Brandon alive?" "For now." "That depends entirely on your cooperation." Ingrid stepped out of the car into the cold Chicago wind. The warehouse district smelled of old metal and broken promises. Each step toward the building felt like walking deeper into a nightmare. But she didn't stop. The main door opened before she could knock. A young man, one of the Castellano brothers from the convenience store, gestured her inside with a gun that looked enormous in the dim light. "Search her," came a voice from the shadows. Rough hands patted her down, checking for weapons or wires. They found neither because Ingrid had brought nothing except her courage and a desperate plan that probably wouldn't work. "Clean," the man reported. "Bring her to me." They escorted her deeper into the warehouse, past stacks of crates and industrial equipment. In the center of the space, powerful lights had been set up, creating an arena of harsh white illumination. Vincent Castellano stood in the middle of it all like a king holding court. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that suggested legitimate business success. He could have been a banker or a lawyer, if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. And there, tied to a chair 20 feet away, was Brandon. Ingrid's heart lurched. His face was bruised, his expensive shirt torn and bloody, but his eyes were alert, furious, and focused entirely on her. "You stupid, beautiful fool," he said, his voice rough but carrying clearly across the space. "I told you to stay put." "When have I ever listened to anyone?" Ingrid replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent smiled, clearly enjoying the reunion. How touching. Young love conquering all. Or in this case, young love getting everyone killed. "I'm here," Ingrid said, turning to face him. "Honor the deal. Let him go." "Oh, my dear," Vincent laughed. "Did you really think I was going to let either of you walk away? You both know too much, and Brandon has been a thorn in my side for far too long." Brandon's voice cut through the warehouse like a blade. "You gave your word, Vincent, to a dead man. Words mean nothing." That's when Ingrid heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. The whisper of footsteps on concrete, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond the lights. Brandon heard it too. She could see the slight smile that touched his lips despite his injuries. "You know," Ingrid said loudly, stalling for time, "for such a powerful man, you make a lot of stupid mistakes." Vincent's expression darkened. "Excuse me?" "The sleeping pills I used on Antonio's team, I only used half the bottle." She pulled the remaining vials from her pocket. "The other half went into the coffee I sent over as a peace offering an hour ago." "What are you talking about?" "I may be a civilian, but I'm not stupid. You think Brandon came here alone? You think he doesn't have contingency plans?" As if summoned by her words, the lights suddenly cut out, plunging the warehouse into total darkness. Gunfire erupted from 3 different directions, muzzle flashes lighting up the space like deadly fireworks. In the chaos, Ingrid threw herself toward Brandon's chair, her hands fumbling for the ropes that bound him. The coffee gambit had been a complete bluff. She had no idea if Brandon's people were here or if she'd just gotten them all killed. "I've got you," she whispered, as his bonds came free. "Not bad for a nurse," Brandon replied, pulling her against him as bullets whistled overhead. "But next time, trust me to handle my own rescue. Next time, don't get captured." Even in the middle of a firefight, he laughed. "Deal." The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing Brandon's security team standing over the bodies of Vincent's men. Vincent himself was on his knees, bleeding from a shoulder wound, his empire crumbling around him. "This isn't over," he snarled as Brandon's men secured him. Brandon stood slowly, pulling Ingrid with him. Yes, Vincent, it is. As dawn broke over Chicago, Ingrid found herself back in Brandon's penthouse, safe but forever changed. She'd saved the life of a man who'd risked everything to protect her, and in doing so, she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. The question now was, what came next? 3 weeks after the warehouse incident, Ingrid was beginning to understand that loving a man like Brandon Russo meant living in a world where danger was as common as morning coffee. She'd moved into his penthouse permanently, officially for her protection, unofficially because neither of them could bear to be apart. "You're brooding again," she said, entering his study where he sat staring at surveillance photos scattered across his mahogany desk. Brandon looked up, his steel blue eyes softening as they always did when he saw her. Even after everything they'd been through, that look still made her heart skip. "Vincent's nephew, Marcus, disappeared from federal custody yesterday," he said, gathering the photos, along with 3 other Castellano soldiers. Ingrid felt ice in her veins. How is that possible? Money, corruption, fear. Brandon stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. "Take your pick. The point is, he's out there, and he blames us for his uncle's death." Vincent Castellano had died in federal prison 2 days after his arrest, officially a heart attack, though everyone knew the truth. When you betrayed the code by targeting civilians, even enemy families turned against you. Vincent's execution had been swift and merciless. "So what does that mean for us?" Ingrid asked, moving to stand beside him. Brandon's arm encircled her waist, pulling her close. "It means we need to be careful. We need to be... Marcus is young, angry, and stupid. A dangerous combination. But you handled Vincent, surely." "Vincent was old school," Brandon interrupted. "He had rules, even twisted ones. Marcus has no rules, no honor. He's the kind of man who'd target innocent people just to make a point." The weight of that settled between them. Ingrid had been naive to think that Vincent's death would end their troubles. In Brandon's world, violence only bred more violence. "There's something else," Brandon said quietly. "My contacts in the FBI are hearing chatter about a federal investigation. Someone's been feeding information to the authorities about our operations. A spy in your organization. Has to be. Too many details are accurate." Brandon's jaw tightened. "I've got 20 men I trust with my life, and one of them is selling me out." Ingrid studied his profile, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand unconsciously moved toward his gun. This was the burden he carried, trusting people who might betray him, making life-or-death decisions based on incomplete information. "How do you stand it?" she asked. "Never knowing who's loyal?" "Same way you stand working in the ER," he replied. "You do what needs to be done and hope for the best." Their conversation was interrupted by Antonio's voice from the intercom. "Boss, we've got visitors. The kind you'll want to see." 5 minutes later, Ingrid found herself facing 2 people she'd never expected to meet. Brandon's cousins from New York, Sophia and Michael Russo. Sophia was stunning in an elegant, dangerous way, while Michael had the same steel blue eyes as Brandon, but with a warmer demeanor. "So this is the nurse who's got our cousin wrapped around her finger," Sophia said, sizing up Ingrid with calculating eyes. "Sophia," Brandon warned. "What?" "I'm just curious about the woman who convinced the infamous Brandon Russo to risk everything for love." Michael stepped forward with a genuine smile. "Ignore her. She's protective, we all are." He extended his hand. "It's good to finally meet you, Ingrid. Brandon's told us a lot about you." "He has?" Ingrid glanced at Brandon, surprised. "Don't look so shocked," Sophia said with a smirk. "He called us the night of the warehouse incident, completely panicked because you drugged his security team to save his ungrateful hide." "I wasn't panicked," Brandon protested. "You were terrified," Michael confirmed. "I haven't heard you that emotional since—" He stopped abruptly, glancing at Sophia. "Since Maria died," Sophia finished quietly. The name hit Ingrid like a physical blow. In all their conversations, Brandon had mentioned his murdered sister, but never by name. Maria, the woman whose death had shaped him into the man he'd become. "She would have liked you," Sophia continued, her expression softening. "Maria always said Brandon needed someone brave enough to call him on his bullshit." "Which brings us to why we're here," Michael said, his tone becoming serious. "Marcus Castellano isn't just targeting you two. He's been reaching out to families in New York, trying to build an alliance against the Russos." Brandon's expression darkened. "Who's listening?" "The Torinos are interested. They're still angry about the dock situation last year." "And the Morettis?" "Undecided. But if Marcus offers them enough..." Ingrid watched the exchange, understanding that she was witnessing high-level strategy in the criminal underworld. These weren't just family members catching up. This was a war council. "We came to offer support," Sophia said. 20 soldiers, full backing from the New York families loyal to us. "I appreciate it," Brandon replied. "But this is my fight." "Like hell it is," Michael shot back. "Marcus threatens one Russo, he threatens all of us. Besides," he grinned, "we like her. Anyone who's crazy enough to take on Vincent Castellano to save your sorry ass is family in my book." For the first time since Vincent's death, Ingrid saw Brandon truly smile. The bond between these cousins ran deeper than blood. It was forged by shared danger, mutual respect, and genuine love. "There's one more thing," Sophia said, her expression becoming serious. "The federal investigation? We think we know who your informant is." Brandon went perfectly still. "Who?" "Thomas DeMarco, your accountant." The betrayal hit Brandon like a physical blow. Thomas had been with the organization for 15 years, had been at Brandon's father's funeral, had helped rebuild after Maria's death. "You're certain?" Brandon asked, his voice deadly quiet. 90%, Michael replied. "Our FBI contact confirmed he's been trading information for immunity." Ingrid watched the transformation in Brandon's face, from shock to rage to the cold calculation that had built an empire. This was the moment she truly understood what loving him meant. She was seeing the future execution of a man who'd betrayed his trust. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. Brandon's smile was winter incarnate. "I'm going to remind everyone why betraying the Russo family is the last mistake people make." The confrontation with Thomas DeMarco took place in the back room of Russo's restaurant, an upscale Italian place that served as both legitimate business and neutral ground for family meetings. Ingrid hadn't wanted to come, but Brandon insisted she understand all aspects of his world, including the ugly parts. Thomas was a thin man in his 50s, nervous energy radiating from him as he sat across from Brandon at the polished wooden table. He kept glancing at the door like he was considering running, which would have been pointless given Antonio and 2 other soldiers blocking the exit. 15 years, Tommy," Brandon said conversationally, cutting into his osso buco. 15 years you've eaten at my table, trusted me with your secrets, taken my protection, and this is how you repay that loyalty." "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas replied, but his voice shook. "Federal case number 2024 CR 1847, Brandon recited from memory. "United States versus Brandon Russo and Associated Criminal Enterprises, filed 3 months ago. Based on financial records and insider information that only 3 people in my organization had access to. Want to guess who those 3 people were?" Thomas's face had gone pale. "Brandon, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly." Brandon set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "The FBI approached you. They showed you pictures of federal prison, told you what happens to accountants who launder money for the mob. You got scared. They threatened my daughter," Thomas whispered. "Said they'd arrest her for accessory charges if I didn't cooperate. She's pregnant, Brandon. She can't go to prison." For a moment, something human flickered in Brandon's eyes. "Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you trust me to protect your family?" "Because I was terrified." Thomas's composure cracked completely. "Because I've seen what happens to people who cross the FBI. Because I thought maybe if I gave them enough to satisfy them, I could protect everyone I love." Ingrid found herself in the surreal position of feeling sympathy for both men. Thomas was a father trying to protect his daughter, just as Brandon was a leader trying to protect his family. In this world, loyalty and love often demanded impossible choices. "The information you gave them," Brandon continued, his voice deadly calm. "How much?" "Financial records going back 5 years, names of some associates. Nothing about the violent operations," Brandon finished. "How considerate of you." The sarcasm cut like a blade. Thomas flinched. "You know what the worst part is, Tommy. If you'd come to me, I would have protected your daughter, would have made sure the FBI understood that threatening innocent family members was off limits. Instead, you chose to betray 15 years of trust." Brandon stood, straightening his cufflinks with deliberate precision. "Ingrid, would you mind waiting in the car?" She understood what he was asking. This was the moment when Brandon Russo, the protector, became Brandon Russo, the executioner. The man who'd saved her life was about to take another, and he was giving her the chance to maintain some innocence. "No," she said quietly. "If this is your world, If this is who you are, then I need to see it. Brandon studied her face, perhaps looking for judgment or fear. He found neither. This is who I have to be, he said. Not who I want to be. I know. And she did understand, even as her heart broke for both men in that room. Thomas was crying now, the weight of his choices crushing him. Please, Brandon, I'll disappear, leave the country, you'll never see me again. That's not how this works, Tommy. You know that. But instead of drawing his gun, Brandon pulled out his phone. Sophia, it's me, I need a favor. He listened for a moment. Thomas DeMarco's daughter, Rebecca. She's 6 months pregnant, living in Portland. I need her to disappear for a while. New identity, new location, federal protection that actually works. Thomas looked up, confused and hopeful. Here's what's going to happen, Brandon continued. Your daughter is going to vanish into witness protection. Real protection, not the half-assed FBI version. She'll have a new life, new identity, enough money to raise her child safely. And me, Thomas whispered. You're going to fix the damage you've done. You're going to feed the FBI false information, lead their investigation down dead ends, buy us time to clean house. Brandon's voice turned arctic. And if you ever betray my trust again, if you ever put my family at risk, I won't be this merciful. It was brilliant, Ingrid realized. Brandon had found a way to neutralize the threat while maintaining his reputation for decisive action. Thomas would live, but he'd spend the rest of his life knowing that his daughter's safety depended on his absolute loyalty. After Thomas left, escorted by Antonio to begin his new role as double agent, Ingrid found herself alone with Brandon in the empty restaurant. You expected me to kill him, Brandon said, not a question. I expected you to do what you thought was necessary. And what do you think was necessary? Ingrid considered the question carefully. I think you found a way to protect everyone you care about while solving a dangerous problem. I think that makes you exactly the kind of leader people should trust with their lives. Brandon's smile was soft, grateful. You see the best in everyone. I see you clearly, she corrected. The good and the necessary parts. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious. I love you, Ingrid Matthews. God help me, but I love you more than I've ever loved anything. Even more than revenge. Especially more than revenge. They kissed in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the ghosts of difficult choices and impossible loyalties. Outside, Chicago glittered with promise and danger, but in that moment, they had each other. That was when Brandon's phone rang, shattering their peace. What? He answered sharply. Ingrid watched his face change, saw the moment when their brief happiness crumbled. When? He demanded. How many casualties? He hung up and turned to her, his expression grim. Marcus Castellano just bombed one of our legitimate businesses, he said. A restaurant in Little Italy. 15 people injured, 3 dead. The war they'd tried to prevent had officially begun. The bombed restaurant looked like a war zone. Emergency vehicles lined the street, their red and blue lights painting the night in shades of violence. Ingrid stood beside Brandon as he surveyed the damage, watching him catalogue every detail with the cold precision of a general planning his next move. The bomb was planted during lunch rush, Antonio reported, his voice tight with rage. Targeted the kitchen. Maximum casualties among our people. 3 dead. Ingrid tried not to think about the fact that she'd eaten at this restaurant just 2 weeks ago, had laughed with the waitstaff, complimented the chef on his marinara sauce. Now Mario, the head chef, was dead, along with 2 servers she'd grown fond of. Marcus is sending a message, Brandon said quietly. He wants us to know nowhere is safe. Boss, one of his soldiers approached cautiously. We found something you need to see. They followed him around the back of the building, where crime scene tape fluttered in the Chicago wind. Spray-painted on the brick wall in red letters was a message. The nurse is next. Ingrid felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't just about business anymore. Marcus was making it personal. He's trying to draw you out, Sophia said, appearing at Brandon's shoulder. She'd arrived with Michael an hour ago, along with reinforcements from New York. Make you emotional. Force you into making mistakes. It's working, Brandon replied grimly, because if he thinks he can threaten her and live, he's about to learn otherwise. Brandon, Ingrid began. No, his voice cut like steel. This ends now, tonight. The War Council convened at the penthouse 2 hours later. 20 of Brandon's most trusted soldiers, plus Sophia and Michael from New York, gathered around the dining room table that had been cleared of everything except weapons, surveillance photos, and tactical plans. Marcus has holed up in the old Castellano compound, Michael reported, pointing to architectural blueprints spread across the table. Warehouse district surrounded by his remaining soldiers, maybe 15 men total. 15 desperate men with nothing to lose, Sophia corrected. That makes them dangerous. More dangerous than they realize, Brandon said, studying the plans. Because we're not just going in to capture Marcus. We're going in to end the Castellano threat permanently. Ingrid listened to the tactical discussion with growing horror. They were planning an assault that would likely result in multiple deaths, possibly including Brandon's. The man she loved was about to walk into a fortress, defended by people who wanted him dead. There's another option, she said quietly. The room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, some curious, others skeptical that a civilian could contribute anything useful to military planning. He wants me, Ingrid continued. Marcus made that clear, so let's give him what he wants. Absolutely not, Brandon said immediately. Hear me out. We set up a meeting, make it look like I'm betraying you, trading information for my safety. Get me inside his compound, close enough to get yourself killed, Brandon interrupted. Not happening. Actually, Sophia said thoughtfully, it's not a terrible idea. Brandon turned on his cousin. Don't you dare... Think about it, Sophia continued. Marcus expects a frontal assault. He's prepared for warfare, not espionage. If Ingrid could get inside, plant tracking devices, maybe even sabotage their defenses. I won't use the woman I love as bait, Brandon said flatly. It's not your choice, Ingrid replied, meeting his eyes across the table. I'm not your employee or your property. I'm your partner, and partners don't let each other face danger alone. The argument that followed was legendary among Brandon's soldiers for years afterward. Two strong-willed people who loved each other desperately, fighting about the best way to keep each other safe. Voices were raised, accusations made, threats issued. Finally, Michael stood up. Enough, we're family, and family finds solutions together. He walked to a whiteboard someone had set up and began sketching. Combination approach. Ingrid makes contact. Sets up the meeting. Gets inside to gather intelligence. But she's wired for sound and video, and we surround the compound with enough firepower to level the building if necessary. I don't like it, Brandon said. I don't like any of our options, Michael replied. But this one gives us the best chance of everyone we care about surviving the night. Sophia nodded. The nurse stays in constant communication. First sign of trouble, we go in hard and fast. Over the next 4 hours, they planned every detail. Ingrid would contact Marcus using a burner phone, claiming she had information about Brandon's defenses and financial accounts. She'd wear concealed cameras and microphones, carry tracking devices, and maintain open communication with the assault teams positioned around the compound. If anything goes wrong, Brandon said as they prepared to leave, if you feel even slightly unsafe, you abort. Say the code word and we come in. What's the code word? Maria, he said quietly. My sister's name. If you say it, I'll know you need me. At midnight, Ingrid found herself in a nondescript van 2 blocks from the Castellano compound, surrounded by enough electronic equipment to launch a space mission. Brandon sat beside her, his face a mask of controlled terror. Last chance to change your mind, he said. Not a chance, Ingrid replied, checking her concealed microphone one final time. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Don't ever say that, Sophia's voice crackled through their earpieces. That's how people get killed in movies. Despite everything, Ingrid laughed. I'll be careful. You'll be magnificent, Brandon said, kissing her softly. And when this is over, we're going somewhere far away from Chicago for a very long vacation. Promise? Promise. 30 minutes later, Ingrid walked through the front door of the Castellano compound, her heart pounding but her voice steady as she greeted Marcus Castellano. I'm here to make a deal, she told him. What she didn't know was that Marcus had been expecting her. In fact, he'd been planning this moment for weeks. The Castellano compound was exactly what Ingrid had expected. Industrial, cold, and designed more for defense than comfort. Marcus led her through corridors lined with armed men, each one studying her with the calculating eyes of predators, deciding if she was threat or prey. I have to admit, Marcus said as they walked, I'm impressed. Brandon Russo's girlfriend, walking voluntarily into my territory. Either you're incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Maybe both, Ingrid replied, focusing on keeping her voice steady, while the hidden cameras recorded everything. Through her earpiece, barely audible, she could hear Brandon's breathing, too fast, too controlled. He was barely containing his panic at watching her walk deeper into danger. So, Marcus said, gesturing for her to sit in a chair facing his desk. "What information could possibly be valuable enough to risk your life?" "Financial accounts," Ingrid said, sticking to their script. "Offshore holdings, legitimate businesses that are actually fronts, real estate purchases under false names. I've been living in his penthouse for weeks. I see everything. And why would you betray the man you supposedly love?" This was the critical moment. Ingrid had to sell the betrayal convincingly enough to fool Marcus, while not saying anything that would actually harm Brandon's organization. "Because I finally understood what loving him means," she said, letting real emotion creep into her voice. "It means watching him order Thomas DeMarco to feed false information to the FBI instead of just killing him. It means seeing him plan assaults on your compound where good people will die. It means accepting that the man I love is capable of terrible things." Marcus leaned forward, interested. "So you're having second thoughts about your dangerous romance?" "I'm having practical thoughts about my future. Brandon's war with you will escalate until someone destroys him. I don't plan to go down with the ship." It was masterful acting based on real fears she'd been wrestling with for weeks. Through her earpiece, she heard Sophia whisper, "Damn, she's good." "What exactly are you offering?" Marcus asked. "Complete financial records, bank account numbers, investment portfolios, the locations of cash reserves, everything you'd need to cripple his operation permanently. In exchange for safe passage out of Chicago, new identity, enough money to disappear and start over somewhere far from this insanity." Marcus was silent for a long moment, studying her face. "You know, there's something I find interesting about your story." "What's that?" "The timing. You suddenly develop a conscience about Brandon's violent tendencies just days after he spares Thomas DeMarco's life. That seems like the opposite of the cold-blooded behavior you claim to be fleeing from." Warning bells went off in Ingrid's head. Through her earpiece, she heard Brandon's sharp intake of breath. "People change," she said carefully. "Maybe saving Thomas made me realize that Brandon isn't as heartless as everyone thinks." "Or," Marcus stood, moving around his desk with predatory grace, "maybe you're exactly where Brandon Russo wants you to be." The room suddenly felt smaller. Ingrid forced herself to remain calm, but her heart was racing. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph. "This was taken 3 hours ago. Brandon's soldiers positioning themselves around this building. Snipers on the rooftops. Assault teams in the abandoned warehouses. Did you really think we wouldn't notice an army surrounding us?" Through her earpiece, Brandon's voice was deadly calm. "Abort. Say the word, and we come in." But Ingrid realized that aborting might not be an option. If Marcus knew about the surveillance, he'd probably found her recording equipment too. "Here's what I think happened," Marcus continued conversationally. "Brandon sent you in here to gather intelligence and plant tracking devices, maybe sabotage our defenses. Meanwhile, his people surround the building, ready to attack the moment you give them the layout." "That's ridiculous," Ingrid said, but even she could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. "Is it? Let's find out." Marcus pressed a button on his desk, and suddenly the room filled with armed men. Before Ingrid could react, rough hands were searching her, finding the hidden cameras, the microphone, the tracking devices Brandon's team had carefully concealed. "Well, well," Marcus said as his men laid the equipment on his desk. "The innocent nurse is actually a spy. How disappointing." Through the microphone before they destroyed it, Ingrid heard Brandon's voice. "I'm coming for you. Whatever happens, hold on." "You know what this means," Marcus said, circling her like a shark. "It means you're not really here to betray Brandon Russo. It means you're here because you love him enough to risk your life for him. That's not—" "It means," Marcus interrupted, "that killing you will hurt him more than destroying his businesses, more than stealing his money, more than anything else I could do." Ingrid's blood turned to ice. Through the windows she could see muzzle flashes in the distance, Brandon's assault teams engaging Marcus's perimeter guards. The battle had begun, but she was trapped at the center of it. "So here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, drawing his gun. "You're going to call Brandon Russo. You're going to tell him that if he wants you back alive, he'll come inside, alone. No weapons, no backup. He'll never do that." "Oh, but he will. Because men like Brandon Russo have one fatal weakness. They love too deeply. They care too much about the people they're supposed to protect." Marcus forced the phone into her hands. "Make the call." Ingrid looked at the phone, then at Marcus, then at the armed men surrounding her. In the distance, the gunfire was getting closer. Brandon was fighting his way toward her, probably getting himself killed in the process. "What if I refuse? Then I shoot you right now and hang your body from the window for him to see." Ingrid's hands shook as she dialed Brandon's number. When he answered, his voice was rough with fear and exertion. "Ingrid, are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she said, meeting Marcus's eyes. "For now." "Listen to me," Brandon said. "Whatever they want, don't—" "He wants you to come inside," Ingrid interrupted. "Alone, no weapons." The silence on the other end of the line lasted forever. "Brandon," she whispered. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," he said finally. "No," Ingrid shouted, but Marcus had already taken the phone. "Touching," Marcus said. "True love really does conquer all, even common sense." Brandon Russo walked through the front door of the Castellano compound at exactly 2:17 a.m., his hands empty, his expression deadly calm. Ingrid's heart shattered watching him surrender himself for her, knowing that this was probably where both their stories ended. "Mr. Russo," Marcus said with mock courtesy, "so good of you to accept my invitation." "Let her go," Brandon said simply. "This is between us." "Oh, but she's so much more than just leverage now," Marcus replied, gesturing to his men, who immediately surrounded Brandon. "She's the key to everything." Brandon allowed himself to be searched and restrained, never taking his eyes off Ingrid. She could see him cataloguing her condition, checking for injuries, probably planning 17 different escape routes despite being outnumbered and outgunned. "You see," Marcus continued, settling into his chair like a king holding court, "I've spent weeks studying you, Brandon, trying to understand what makes the great Brandon Russo tick. Your father was easy. He loved money and power. Your sister was driven by justice. But you're motivated by something much more dangerous. Get to the point, Marcus." "Love," Marcus said simply. "You love too much, too deeply. It makes you predictable. It makes you weak, if you say so. 3 years ago you let emotion drive you to destroy my family over your sister's death. Tonight you walked into an obvious trap because you couldn't bear to lose another woman you love. Face it, Brandon. Your feelings are going to get you killed." Through the window, Ingrid could see the ongoing gun battle between their respective forces. Sophia and Michael's voices occasionally crackled through damaged communication equipment scattered around the room, coordinating the assault from outside. "You know what's funny?" Marcus continued. "My Uncle Vincent was right about one thing. You Russos always think you're better than everyone else, more honorable, more civilized. But when it comes down to it, you're just as brutal as the rest of us." "More brutal," Brandon corrected quietly. "When necessary." Something in his tone made Marcus pause. For the first time since Ingrid had entered the compound, the young Castellano looked uncertain. "What did you think would happen here tonight, Marcus?" Brandon asked, his voice conversational despite the restraints binding his hands. "That you'd kill me and my people would just accept it? That the other families would let you take over Chicago? I thought I'd send a message about the consequences of crossing the Castellanos." "The Castellanos are finished," Brandon said matter-of-factly. "Vincent died in federal prison. You're about to die here. Your soldiers are being systematically eliminated by superior forces. Your financial assets were frozen by federal authorities approximately," he checked his watch, 20 minutes ago. Marcus's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "The federal investigation you've been so worried about. It was never really about me. Thomas DeMarco has been feeding them information about your operation for months. Bank accounts, drug shipments, your uncle's illegal arms deals with terrorist organizations." Ingrid watched the color drain from Marcus's face as Brandon's words sank in. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered. "Is it? Check your phone. Try to access your offshore accounts." With shaking hands, Marcus pulled out his phone. Ingrid could see his expression change as he realized Brandon was telling the truth. Everything was frozen, seized, gone. "You see, Marcus," Brandon continued, "while you were focused on revenge, I was playing a much longer game. The warehouse confrontation 3 weeks ago. I let myself be captured because I needed Vincent to believe he was winning. I needed him to get careless, to make mistakes that would expose his entire network to federal investigation." "You're lying." "Thomas DeMarco never betrayed me," Brandon said softly. "He's been working for me from the beginning, feeding your family false information while gathering evidence against you. The FBI task force isn't investigating the Russos, they're investigating the Castellanos." "But we had proof." "You had what I wanted you to have." Brandon's smile was sharp as a blade. financial records showing legitimate businesses, philanthropic donations, carefully laundered money that looked suspicious but was perfectly legal. Meanwhile, Thomas was documenting every illegal transaction your family made. Ingrid stared at the man she loved, realizing she was witnessing a master strategist reveal a plan months in the making. Everything, Vincent's capture, Thomas's apparent betrayal, even tonight's assault, had been part of an elaborate operation to destroy the Castellano organization permanently. The bombing at my restaurant? Brandon asked. My people were already evacuated. The casualties were volunteers from a rival family who wanted to make it look real. Even this compound is surrounded by federal agents, not just my soldiers. As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of sirens began echoing through the night. You have approximately 3 minutes before FBI tactical teams breach this building, Brandon said calmly. I suggest you surrender peacefully. Marcus raised his gun toward Ingrid, his hands shaking with rage. Then she dies with me. No, Brandon said, his voice dropping to Arctic temperatures. She doesn't. The restraints binding Brandon's hands fell away. Apparently they'd never been properly secured. In one fluid motion, he drew a gun from an ankle holster his captors had missed and put 3 bullets center mass into Marcus Castellano. The young crime boss dropped like a stone, his weapon clattering across the floor. How? Ingrid whispered, staring at Brandon in shock. Antonio has been feeding your guards false information about my weapons for the past hour, Brandon replied, checking Marcus's pulse to confirm he was dead. Plus, I've been planning this operation since the day Vincent first threatened you. The compound's front doors exploded inward as federal agents poured through. Sophia's voice crackled over the radio. Federal task force is securing the building. All Russo personnel stand down. Brandon pulled Ingrid into his arms, holding her like he'd never let go. Is it over? She whispered against his chest. The Castellano threat is over, he confirmed. Vincent's nephew was the last of their bloodline with any claim to power. And the federal investigation? The real investigation concludes with the arrest of the remaining Castellano soldiers and the seizure of their assets. As for the Russo organization, Brandon smiled. We've been cooperating with federal authorities to eliminate criminal elements from Chicago's Italian community. Very public-spirited of us. Ingrid pulled back to look at him. You planned all of this. Every detail. I planned everything except falling in love with you, he admitted. That was the one variable I didn't account for. The one thing that could have ruined everything. How? Because if Marcus had actually hurt you, I would have burned Chicago to the ground to get you back. Would have destroyed everything I'd worked for, exposed every carefully laid plan just to keep you safe. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, tasting victory and relief and the promise of a future without constant fear. So what happens now? She asked. Now we go home, Brandon said, leading her toward the exit where Sophia and Michael waited with concerned smiles. And tomorrow we start figuring out what normal people do with their time. 6 months after the fall of the Castellano family, Ingrid discovered that normal was a relative concept when you were in love with Brandon Russo. They'd moved to a new penthouse, larger, more secure, with a view of both the lake and the city that took her breath away every morning. The Foundation is requesting another meeting, Sophia said, settling into one of the leather chairs in Brandon's home office. She'd been staying in Chicago for the past few months, helping transition the Russo organization into something more legitimate. Which foundation? Ingrid asked, looking up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing applications for nursing scholarships they were funding. The one for families of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty, Sophia replied. Apparently our donation was so large, they want to make sure we're not laundering money. Brandon laughed from behind his desk. Ironic, considering we're probably the cleanest criminal organization in Chicago history at this point. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Over 6 months, Brandon had systematically legitimized every aspect of his operation. The illegal businesses were shut down or sold. The questionable activities were terminated. What remained was a network of restaurants, real estate holdings, and construction companies that operated entirely within the law. Speaking of clean operations, Michael's voice came from the doorway as he entered with Antonio. The FBI wants to offer you a consulting contract. For what? Brandon asked. Helping them understand how organized crime families launder money and hide assets. Apparently your cooperation in the Castellano investigation impressed some people in Washington. Ingrid shook her head in amazement. 6 months ago, you were a crime boss. Now the FBI wants to hire you as a consultant. Stranger things have happened, Brandon replied, though I'm not sure I want to spend my time thinking about criminal enterprises anymore. What do you want to spend your time on? Sophia asked with a knowing smile. Brandon's gaze found Ingrid across the room, the same look of wonder and love that had been there since the night they met. Building something lasting, something clean, something I can be proud of. The intercom buzzed, interrupting their conversation. Mr. Russo, came the voice of their new security chief, a former FBI agent named Sarah Chen. There's a delivery here for Ms. Matthews. The courier says it's urgent. Send him up, Brandon said, his expression immediately shifting to alert caution. 5 minutes later, Ingrid was staring at an ornate envelope addressed to her in elegant handwriting. Inside was a wedding invitation. Her sister Rebecca was getting married in San Francisco next month. I didn't even know she was engaged, Ingrid said softly. When did you last talk to your family? Sophia asked gently. Christmas, before everything happened with Vincent. Ingrid sank into her chair, the weight of months of isolation hitting her. I couldn't risk calling them. Couldn't risk Marcus or Vincent using them as leverage. Brandon moved to stand behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders. The threat's over. You can reach out to them now. Can I? Ingrid looked up at him. What do I tell them? That I've spent the last year living with a former crime boss? That I helped plan federal raids against organized crime families? You tell them you fell in love, Sophia said simply. You tell them you found someone who would risk everything to keep you safe. They'll never understand. Then make them understand, Michael suggested. Invite them here. Let them meet Brandon. See who he really is. The idea terrified and thrilled Ingrid in equal measure. Her family, mother, father, 2 siblings, various aunts and uncles, were suburban professionals who thought jaywalking was morally questionable. How could she possibly explain Brandon's world? What if they hate you? She asked Brandon. Then I'll win them over, he replied, with the confidence that had built an empire. I convinced the FBI to trust me. How hard can your parents be? 3 weeks later, Ingrid stood in Chicago's O'Hare Airport, waiting for her family's flight to arrive. Brandon stood beside her, looking uncomfortably elegant in a tailored navy suit that did nothing to hide his dangerous edge. Remember, Ingrid said for the 10th time, my father is the insurance adjuster. My mother teaches elementary school. They think Al Capone is ancient history. And your sister, Rebecca, is a social worker. She believes everyone can be rehabilitated. Your situation might actually appeal to her. And your brother? David is a prosecutor. He might be more challenging. Brandon's laugh was dry. A prosecutor, of course. The flight from San Francisco arrived 20 minutes late. Ingrid watched the passengers deplane, her anxiety building with each passing moment. Then she saw them, her parents, looking exactly the same as they had at Christmas, her brother David in his perpetual suit and wire-rimmed glasses. Ingrid! Her mother, Patricia, rushed toward her with arms outstretched. The hug was fierce, desperate, full of months of worry and missed connections. Hi, Mom, Ingrid whispered, feeling like a child again. We've been so worried, Patricia said, pulling back to study her daughter's face. You sounded so strange on the phone, and it's been months since we— Mom, Dad, David, Ingrid interrupted. I'd like you to meet Brandon Russo. The introductions were awkward but polite. Her father, James, shook Brandon's hand with the careful courtesy of a man sizing up his daughter's boyfriend. David was more direct, studying Brandon with the analytical gaze of someone who spent his days prosecuting criminals. Russo, David said thoughtfully. That name sounds familiar. It's a common Italian surname, Brandon replied smoothly. No, I mean specifically. I feel like I've seen it in case files. Ingrid's heart sank. This was exactly what she'd feared. You probably have, Brandon said calmly. My family has been involved in various legal proceedings over the years. What kind of legal proceedings? David pressed. David, Ingrid warned. It's okay, Brandon said, meeting her brother's gaze directly. I'm not ashamed of my past, and I won't lie to your family. He turned to address all of them. I used to run what the FBI classified as an organized crime family. I was never convicted of anything, but I operated outside the law for most of my adult life. The silence that followed was deafening. However, Brandon continued, I've spent the last year working with federal authorities to legitimize my operations and assist in criminal investigations. I'm no longer involved in anything illegal. Jesus Christ, Ingrid, David whispered. You're dating a mobster. Former mobster, Ingrid corrected. And he saved my life. From other mobsters. From people who would have killed me for something I didn't do. Brandon protected me when no one else could. Patricia was staring at Brandon like he was an exotic animal. You're really in the Mafia. Was, Brandon corrected. Past tense. And now? Now I run legitimate businesses and try to be worthy of your daughter's love. It was James who broke the tension. Well, he said with the practical calm of a man who'd spent his career assessing risk, I suppose we should hear the whole story. The family dinner that night would be remembered by everyone present as the most surreal meal of their lives. They sat in Brandon's penthouse dining room, eating food prepared by a chef who'd once cooked for crime families, while Ingrid's suburban parents tried to process their daughter's extraordinary life. So you've never actually killed anyone yourself? Patricia asked, with the same tone she might use to discuss the weather. Mom, Ingrid protested. It's a fair question, Brandon replied. And the answer is yes, I have, but only in self-defense or to protect innocent people. David set down his fork. How many people? David, don't, Ingrid began. 7, Brandon said simply. Over 15 years. Each one was someone who threatened my family or violated the codes that keep civilian casualties to a minimum. Codes? James asked. No women, no children, no uninvolved civilians caught in crossfire, Brandon recited. No drugs near schools or playgrounds. No human trafficking. No extortion of legitimate small businesses. So you were a principled criminal? Patricia asked, clearly struggling with the concept. I tried to be, but I won't pretend that makes it right. Rebecca, who'd been quiet through most of the conversation, suddenly spoke up. What changed? Why did you decide to go legitimate? Brandon's eyes found Ingrid across the table. I fell in love with someone who deserved better than a criminal for a boyfriend. That's not true, Ingrid protested. You were already changing before we met. The legitimate businesses, the charitable work, window dressing, Brandon interrupted. I was still running illegal operations, still making money from violence and fear. Meeting you made me want to be the man you saw when you looked at me. And what man is that? David asked skeptically. Someone who protects people instead of threatening them. Someone who builds instead of destroys. The conversation continued for hours, covering everything from Brandon's childhood, to his business operations, to his plans for the future. Gradually, Ingrid watched her family's fear and suspicion transform into cautious acceptance. The nursing scholarships were your idea? Patricia asked, reviewing the foundation documents Brandon had shared. Ingrid's idea, he corrected. She said the world needed more people who chose to heal instead of harm. And the construction company that's rebuilding the community center downtown. Joint project between our foundation and the city. We're hiring people from the neighborhood, training them in legitimate trades. James nodded approvingly. Good ROI on community investment. Dad? Ingrid laughed. He's not a stock portfolio. No, but he's thinking like a businessman instead of a criminal, James replied. That's promising. It was Rebecca who asked the question they'd all been avoiding. What about the future? What happens when you two get married and have children? How do you explain Daddy's past to a 5-year-old? Ingrid felt her cheeks burn. No one had mentioned marriage, though the possibility hung in the air between them like a promise. The same way you explain any difficult truth to children, Brandon said thoughtfully. Carefully, age-appropriately, with context about growth and change. You've thought about this, Patricia observed. Every day, Brandon admitted, because I love your daughter enough to want a family with her, and because any children we have deserve to grow up proud of their father. After dinner, while Brandon showed David and James his collection of legal documents proving his cooperation with federal authorities, Patricia cornered Ingrid in the kitchen. Are you happy? Her mother asked directly. Incredibly happy, Ingrid replied. Happier than I ever thought possible. And you feel safe? Safer than I've ever felt. Mom, I know this is crazy. I know it's not the life you imagined for me. But Brandon would die before he let anything hurt me. That's what scares me, Patricia said softly. Not that he might hurt you, but that someone might hurt him. Could you handle losing him to violence? It was the question Ingrid had been avoiding for months. I don't know, she admitted, but I know I can't handle losing him to fear. The next morning, as her family prepared to return to San Francisco, David pulled Ingrid aside for a private conversation. I ran some searches, he said. Federal database, criminal records, the works. Ingrid's heart sank. And? And he's telling the truth. Everything he said about cooperating with federal investigators, legitimizing his operations, it's all documented. He really has transformed his organization. You sound surprised. I am. Most criminals don't change, Ingrid. They just get better at hiding what they're doing. But the federal prosecutors I've spoken with say Brandon Russo is the real deal. He's provided information that's led to hundreds of arrests, shut down multiple criminal enterprises, and done it all without trying to cut deals for himself. What are you saying? I'm saying your mobster boyfriend might actually be one of the good guys now. The goodbye at the airport was emotional and complicated. Her parents hugged Brandon like they were accepting him into the family, while David shook his hand with newfound respect. "Take care of our girl," James said. "With my life," Brandon replied. "See that you do," Patricia added, with a mother's protective steel in her voice. After they left, Ingrid and Brandon drove back to the penthouse in comfortable silence. The acceptance of her family felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. "That went well," Brandon said as they entered their home. "Better than I expected." Ingrid settled onto the couch beside him. "Though I'm pretty sure my mother is going to spend the next month researching organized crime rehabilitation programs. Your brother seems satisfied that I'm not an active threat, and Rebecca already loves you. She sees you as a redemption story." "What do you see me as?" Brandon asked, pulling her into his arms. "Home," Ingrid said simply. "I see you as home." They sat together watching the city lights twinkle below, both thinking about the future they were building together. It had been a year since that first night when Brandon had saved her from Vincent's men. A year of danger and transformation and love beyond anything either of them had imagined possible. "Ingrid," Brandon said softly. "Marry me." She pulled back to look at him, heart racing. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, producing a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. Let me be the man you believed I could become." The ring was perfect. Simple, elegant, with a diamond that caught the light like a promise. But more important was the expression on Brandon's face, the vulnerability and hope and desperate love that made him look younger than his 30 years. "Yes," she whispered, laughing through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Yes, Brandon Russo, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then kissed her with the passion of a man who'd found his salvation in an unexpected place. Outside, Chicago glittered with possibility. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the midst of violence and danger planned a future built on love, redemption, and the belief that anyone could change if they had the right reason. 6 months later, they were married in a ceremony that brought together FBI agents and former criminals, federal prosecutors and reformed crime family members, all celebrating the union of a nurse who'd risked everything to save the man she loved, and a former mob boss who'd transformed his life to be worthy of her.